When I first became a follower of Jesus, and really, for me, that's a much more comfortable phrase. We use the word Christian, we pitch it around a lot. I know it's accurate biblically. The followers of Jesus were first called Christians in Antioch. But today, it's become kind of a term that is applicable in so many realms until it's almost lost its meaning. A person would say, well, I'm a Christian because I'm not a Muslim. Or they would say, I'm a Christian because I'm a nice person. I like the term follower of Jesus. I think it makes things more specific. And when I first became one, I wasn't one my whole life. I was 22 when I became a follower. When I believed. I started out right away reading Francis Schaeffer. Now, how did I pick out Francis Schaeffer? I just saw the book on, when you first become a believer, the first thing I did was go to a Christian bookstore, right? You want to find out what you can be reading that's going to help you to follow Jesus. And so I saw this book, and it was called Escape from Reason by Francis Schaeffer. Well, as soon as I started reading the book, it was way over my head. I couldn't understand 50% of the vocabulary you used. But being the kind of person I am, I said, you know what? This is not going to beat me. I'm going to learn to read this stuff. So I did, and I stayed with it for years and finally learned to read it. And then I read a second book of his, which I have never forgotten based upon not only what it says, but the title was so powerful for me. He says, the title of the book is, How Then Shall We Live? Once we're believers, how then shall we live? Well, that's what Paul is going to address today in this text. I'll begin reading in chapter 12, verse 9. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need, and practice hospitality. Well, how then shall we live? Paul gives us a kind of a laundry list here of what normative following Jesus should look like. This is a hard list. If one takes this list and really lives it out, we are going to be we should be very different people than people who are just wandering around in this world with no concern whatsoever for any of this. And there are lots of those. And that's unfortunate. But the worst thing is that when we do say that we're followers of Jesus and we don't take this seriously. The first text that I read, where he says, let love be sincere, that's a very specific word that he uses for sincere. It is apohypokrites. Now, the worst charge that we get as believers is what? What is it when people who aren't believers look at we who are in the church, who are saying that we're followers of Jesus, what word gets applied to us most often? Hypocrites. That's where that word comes from. The hypokrites was a mask. If you went to a Greek play in the first century and right on through till the collapse of the Roman Empire while the Greco-Roman world was still operant, if you went to a Greek play, all the actors would be men. And there would only be 2 or 3. But there might be 20 characters in the play. And there'd be a table or a stand somewhere covered with these little masks. Some of them were on a stick, and some of them were just held up by hand, and they would, as if the father was talking to the son, and that one actor did the 2 parts, he would pick up the mask for the father, he would do that part, and then it was time for the son to respond, he would pick up another mask and he would respond. Mm-hmm. So we get that word hypocrite from hypokrites, from the actor, and it literally means to put on a mask. So Paul says, love, but don't love in appearance by putting on a mask. There's another aspect of this that is somewhat unfortunate for you and for me. Lots of times we love, or we act as though we do. We become the hypokrites. And I don't mean that in the derogatory 21st century term of hypocrite. I mean we literally kind of pretend sometimes. Maybe we have to. I don't know the answer to that. But sometimes we love in order to gain something. We do things in order to gain something back. Maybe it's just a good feeling. Maybe we want to love somebody so we can feel good about ourselves. But how often is it that we can honestly look in ourselves and say that we love somebody because we really love them, with no hope of anything coming back to us? That's a hard standard. That's a very hard standard. He says, love good and hate evil. Well, is that even possible? I mean, I know that we all hate the consequences. If we get caught doing something, or if there's a consequence to our behavior that's detrimental to our lives, we don't want anybody to catch us, and we don't want to suffer anything. If I drive up and down the road at 110 miles an hour, not only might I get a speeding ticket, I might turn the car over in a ditch someplace. But I hate the consequence, but I don't hate the behavior. Paul says, no, we should hate the behavior deeply. So do we hate the consequences, or do we hate the behavior? How do we in the church do this sort of thing? There is a way, and I'm going to say it actually becomes a rote practice for some of us. I'll speak to it myself. A lot of things as following Jesus have to be simply practiced. They're not things that come natural to us. How do we prefer each other over ourselves? That's really hard, isn't it? I mean, if every marriage was structured such that the partners preferred each other over themselves, preferred the other, I'd say the success rate would be far higher. So Paul uses two words. The first one you'll recognize just like that. You'll be an instant Greek scholar. Philadelphia. Well, we've got a city in our country named after that. What does it mean? It's friendship love. It's the kind of love that we should all just absolutely have for each other. Philadelphia. There's another one he uses. Philostorgoi. What is that? That's the kind of love that family members have. And Paul says to you and to me, when we become followers of Jesus, we have entered into a new family relationship that is just as deep as the ones we have within our family. The follower of Jesus, and I'm going to say this, and this is hard for us to hear in this country because everything about our country is structured around the ethos, the general tenor of what it is to live rightly in this country is structured around our rights. That's how we look at everything. What is my right here? I'm right to have this. I'm right to have that. Look, when we say yes to Jesus, I know it's a lifelong process, we have no rights. Rights go away when we say yes to Jesus. Now we have duties. Some of them are just hard obligations, but I'm going to go in, hopefully by the end of this, you'll see that it's not all like that. I mean, he says to have zeal. Well, how many people get up at 5:30 in the morning and pick up their Bible and have instantaneous zeal for what they've got in their hands? Man, it takes every bit of my effort to sit down and rub all the whatever that is that collects in your eyes overnight and get it out so that I can see, without these little clouds floating around in front of me, to start working on something so that I can present something here. I want to be zealous. I want to get up and just be all excited, woo! But I'm not. It's hard work. I have to make myself do it. But then as things go along, I do get excited about it. So this zeal, I'm going to say for anybody in here who says, well, Rip, I tried to pray a lot last week and it just didn't go well. And now I've been 2 or 3 weeks, I didn't pray. And, things just happen. I got a friend of mine who just says that. He says, yeah, I pray and then stuff just happens anyhow. I said, that doesn't sound very good at all. If we were to really ask God to make us zealous for something of His heart, He would. He would. But we've got to demonstrate a desire for that. And I'm going to say it's supernatural. I'm going to say zeal for the Lord and the things of the Lord is not natural to us. Paul calls the whole universe at enmity with God. That includes you and me. So if the whole universe is at war with God, then I should expect that I should be kind of at war with him too within myself. It's going to take God to do that, to make me zealous. What if we were to walk around this world, every one of us who it matters to, would walk around this world and say, how in this moment, not tomorrow and not next week and not when Sunday comes, but how in this moment can I live in a way that I would please God? I think everything would look a whole bunch different for all of us, me included. I think life would take a different flavor if our lives were such that we were always going about asking that question. He says here, serve the Lord. In some translations it says that. In other translations it says, serve the times or serve the opportunity. You know why it's that way? Why the translations differ? Because there's a contraction here and nobody knows what it means. You have a contraction of one Greek word, which is kurios, which is Lord. That makes perfect sense. Serve the Lord. You have another contraction that's just as functional here. Serve the times, kairos. Which one is it? Nobody knows. Isn't it interesting, though, that the text teaches the same thing, regardless of the translation? We are here. We've got these moments. What are we doing with them? Are we serving the opportunities God gives us? Are we serving the Lord in those opportunities? Rejoicing in hope. Well, this one almost seems obvious, doesn't it? I mean, after all, if I know the Lord, what else would I do? But I have a friend of mine in a distant land. And actually they're in New Jersey. New Jersey's a big state, so you're never going to find them. I mean, just forget it. If you think you're going to go find this person, you're not going to find them. And I remember in my friendship with them, terrible things would happen in their family. And friends, when you're friends with somebody, I mean, that hurts. When somebody's family, something goes awry. And I remember their reaction was always this. It didn't matter what it was. If, like with my truck out there, smoke was boiling out of their car, or if the house was on fire, or if they lost their job, which happened, they would say, oh, well, praise the Lord anyway. Yeah. And I thought, something's really rubbing me about that. I don't get that. What do you mean, praise the Lord anyway? You just lost your job. That's kind of a denial of what is. And I don't think God expects that out of any of us at all. If we're just going to take things like that and turn them into a mantra, something we just recite and it's going to make everything okay, I'm not so certain that's where God really dwells. Because I'll tell you, when things really, really hurt, when we are really hurt by things in this world, He'll take those things and make us useful to somebody else who is hurting as well. Patience in suffering. This one is probably the hardest of all, I would say, for us in a natural sense. Now, there are people who are pre-wired for this. They just are able to go through stuff and they do really well. And they seem to maintain this positive outlook. I've known people like that. You have too, I'm sure, if you've got any friends. I mean, it assumes you have friends. But if you have friends, you probably have had somebody in your life who was like that. They could just go through whatever and it just didn't seem to affect them. But I'll tell you, it affects us, whether we'll admit it or not. And this is the place where if we are followers of Jesus, we have the greatest opportunities we will ever have to show this world, to show the people around us, to show who He is. It's not going to happen while the ice cream is not melted. It only happens once the ice cream starts running down our fingers. When life gets difficult, we have a chance then. How many of you know the history of Ludwig von Beethoven? A little bit. I mean, everybody knows a little bit. You remember that part, right? Everybody knows that. Did you know, in the midst of his compositional peak, he became deaf? Deaf. Can you imagine? I mean, what do you do if you're deaf and you're a composer? He had this carpenter take a piece of ebony and screw it down to the surface of the piano lid so that he could bite it with his teeth, such that he could pick up enough vibrations in his skull that he could hear what he was composing. I don't even know how many symphonies were done post-deafness. But Ludwig von Beethoven wrote in his journal this. He said, "I will take life by the throat." That sounds pretty good to me. But then I think, but what about when everything in our world seems to come apart? Are we really able to take life by the throat? Remember Nebuchadnezzar? 3 Jewish boys. He puts the big statue up because all the satraps and governors say you need to make a big statue, and if you put the statue out there, all those who won't bow down to it, you should throw them into the furnace. 3 Jewish boys wouldn't bow down to it because they weren't allowed to. Kind of like some of the choices we have to make, right? So Nebuchadnezzar says, fine, I'll throw them in the furnace. He didn't really want to because he kind of liked them, but he threw them in anyway. The furnace was heated up so hot, it says that a couple of the guards that tossed them in were burned alive just by having to get near the thing enough to throw the boys in. Nebuchadnezzar peeks into the furnace a little while later, and what does he see? He sees the 3 boys walking around in the flames. All the ropes are burned off them. Their clothes aren't even singed. Their hair's not even singed, but he sees a 4th person. He sees a 4th person. Patience and suffering. I don't think it's possible for you and for me to know what it is to really live with the power that God would grant to us until we're in a place where that's all we have. That's all they had. That's all we have sometimes. Persistence in prayer. This one is a fuzzy one, especially for the Protestants, which we all are to some degree. How many of us have, and don't raise your hand, please don't raise your hand. How many of us, I never want people to raise their hand. It's always embarrassing. How many of us have large spans of days that go by? Just think for yourself. Don't do this for me. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. For us. Large spans of days wherein there's no communion with God at all. Now just think about that for a little bit. Should it come as any shock to us, if that's the way we live, that the wheels kind of come off life sometimes? I don't think it should be shocking at all. I mean, after all, if we neglect the time that we would spend with Him, we're living alone. It's all up to us. Now, there are some people who like that notion. I'm not one of those. Things look way too big to me. Just within my own family, they look too big to me. And especially given the broader circles of my living, they look too big to me to not ask God to enter into those moments. We're to be people who feel needs. Well, gee whiz. Who can turn on the TV, walk in the street, go to the mall, go to Walmart, sit here, come to anything where there are other people involved and not see that there are needs that need to be filled? There are lots of needs that need to be filled all around us all the time. But there's a bigger question for us. Are we looking for them? Does it matter to us? Are we looking for God to give us a chance to fill a need? Or are we just kind of waiting for Him to happenstance kind of thing? You know, the guy on the side of the road with the sign says, need food. So we go out and buy some food for them. I mean, are we looking for that sort of thing? People that have needs that we can meet, don't hurt too much, it's going to be inconvenient, going to cost something. It's always going to cost us something. See, hospitality takes a lot more forms than just having somebody over for dinner. Some of the other forms might actually cost us something directly. We are literally asked to give ourselves away. If there's one aspect, and I say this with absolute certainty, we have a phrase, and I've pointed to this numerous times. It's important to me. I have a couple of these phrases like that I use, but this one speaks to me very directly. We say to somebody, I'm going to go and spend time somewhere. I'm going to go to somebody's house. I'm going to go to a ball game. I'm going to watch a movie. I'm going to spend that time. Now stop and consider what we're actually saying. You and I, all humanity, we were born, and one day we'll die. We have this fixed amount of time. We don't gain, you don't make up time. Time is flowing. It's flowing right now. There is a fixed commodity from birth to death, period. Whatever that is. Doesn't matter. I remember reading Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher. He says, Doesn't matter whether somebody's got 40 years or 10,000 years. If there's no immortality, none of it means anything. He's right. We've got this fixed commodity right here on this earth that God gives to us, and when we say, I am spending time, that is the most literal statement we can make with our lives. We are. Because it never comes back. We're always spending it and it goes away. But you see, God is not asking us to just spend the time. There's a play, I don't know if you've ever heard of this play. It's Samuel Beckett. You ever heard of this play, Waiting for Godot? Anybody ever heard of that play? You lived in New York. You've probably heard of that play. Did you ever see it? It's the craziest play. These two guys come to this cafe, outdoor cafe, and they sit at a table. The stage is nothing but this table and these two guys, and they make a street scene behind them. They don't even have to do that. They could just black out the stage because nothing matters except these two guys sitting at this table. And they're waiting for this third guy named Godot. And they sit there, and for 30 long minutes, this play lasts, they have these mind-numbingly boring and trivial conversations about absolutely nothing for 30 minutes. And Godot never shows up. And the play is over. That's it. That is not what God asks us to do. To wait for Godot, for the death that's going to come to us all. I don't care how old or young we are. We are not permanent here on this earth. What He's asking us to do is to take the time we've been given from birth to death, especially at the rebirth, and to spend it, but to spend it in a way that matters. Not just to make dust clouds, but to actually do something that matters. He is asking us to spend ourselves. The question is, will we? And a bigger question is, do we even want to? I don't know where everybody